What if the British monarchy just shut the door, permanently, on Meghan Markle? Imagine standing at the gates of Buckingham Palace, dignified, determined, camera-ready, and being told, you're not allowed in. Not just by a guard, not by an aide, but by the King of England himself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's not a scene from a Netflix political thriller. That's a chilling possibility now taking shape across headlines, diplomatic cables, and royal briefings. Because for the first time since she married into the House of Windsor, Meghan Markle may no longer be legally welcome in the United Kingdom. Yes, you heard that right. Behind closed doors and under layers of formality, Meghan Markle's UK visa privileges may have been quietly revoked, or at least suspended pending further action. And if the reports are to be believed, this wasn't a clerical error or an overlooked expiration. It was deliberate, authorized, signed off at the highest level, by King Charles III himself. But how did we get here? How did a woman once hailed as the modern breath of fresh air the monarchy so desperately needed end up blacklisted by the very institution she briefly belonged to? How did a royal wedding watched by 2 billion people end in whispered briefings from the Home Office, reports of diplomatic protocol violations, and rumors of permanent exclusion? Let's pause for a moment, because this story isn't just about one woman and a royal family. It's about power, politics, betrayal, and consequence. It's about a system that has historically operated in shadows, now clashing with a woman who made it her brand to expose it. And it's about something else, too. Timing. Because this alleged visa action didn't come during the peak of Megxit. It didn't come in 2020, when Harry and Meghan first announced they were stepping back. It didn't come after the Oprah interview, nor even after Harry and Meghan hit Netflix like a heat-seeking missile. No, this move, if confirmed, comes now, years after the initial fallout. After coronations, reconciliations, global tours, and canceled Spotify contracts. After Meghan tried to go high fashion and low-key. After Harry's memoir scorched every remaining bridge. Why now? That question alone should grab you by the collar. Because it suggests something triggered this retaliation. A new betrayal. A line crossed. Or perhaps, finally, a royal red line Meghan dared to step over. And trust me, what we've uncovered in this exposé may just explain it. Let me ask you something. What if I told you there's a royal dossier, a real one, circulating quietly within the corridors of power, that it contains surveillance reports, internal communications, and records of Meghan's alleged misuse of her former royal privileges? What if I told you it includes emails from former staffers, documentation of suspected diplomatic infractions, and even airport footage? Still sound like speculation? Then consider this. Sources close to the palace say a confidential memo was signed off by King Charles in late September. Not just a PR directive. An actual directive to review and potentially revoke all immigration-linked privileges granted to Meghan during her time as a working royal. That includes discretionary access to diplomatic travel lanes, event security protocols, and, most explosively, her UK visa status. This is not small, because while Harry, a British citizen and royal by birth, retains his nationality, Meghan's post-royal legal status in Britain has always been murky. Was she granted a spousal visa? A special category diplomatic endorsement? Was there a quiet extension behind the scenes when the couple left the UK? No one knows for sure. Or rather, no one knew. Until now. Because the latest leaks suggest that whatever visa or legal pathway Meghan was relying on to enter Britain has now been challenged. And perhaps already stripped. But let's rewind. Because to truly understand the magnitude of this alleged move, we need to unpack the story step by step. We need to dive into the timeline. From the final days of Queen Elizabeth II, to the private warnings Meghan reportedly received from senior aides, to the alleged dossier that may have informed the King's decision. We'll take you into the whispers of the Home Office, the power plays inside Parliament, the late-night crisis meetings at Clarence House. We'll show you how Meghan's most recent unannounced trip to the UK may have triggered an unprecedented response. We'll unpack the secret meeting Princess and reportedly held in Meghan's defense, and how it was overruled. We'll explore the emotional fallout for Prince Harry. And yes, his desperate attempts to undo what his father had already set in motion. And we'll go even further. Because this isn't just about Meghan being banned from Britain. It's about what happens next. We've learned that Meghan's team may be exploring legal action under international human rights law, possibly even an asylum claim, framed around royal retaliation and political persecution. That's right, political asylum. In the year 2026, from the United Kingdom. And guess what? At least one prominent international lawyer is saying she might have a case. Still think this is tabloid drama? Then consider the implications. A former royal alleging persecution by her in-laws. The King of England personally signing off on her exclusion. The Home Office preparing to justify a visa action in public. And Parliament split on whether it's a matter of law or revenge. The press is already calling it Megxit 2.0, but this time, it's not voluntary. It's exile. And yet, even now, the palace remains silent. No denials, no confirmations, just a steady tightening of the circle. So what's really going on here? Has King Charles finally had enough? Has Meghan pushed one scandal too far? Is this a constitutional maneuver, a personal vendetta, or a desperate bid to protect the crown from further damage? And most urgently, what will Meghan do next? Because if this move stands, it doesn't just strip her of legal access to the UK. It could destroy any future role she hoped to play on the world stage. Philanthropic work, business ties, charity galas, all built around the illusion that she could still re-enter British society when needed. That illusion may now be shattered. But here's where things get even more dramatic. Because just days before this visa move allegedly happened, Meghan made a final defiant move that insiders now say may have sealed her fate forever. It involved a controversial production meeting, a denied security clearance, and a heated call that was reportedly overheard by palace staff. What happened in that moment? Why did it trigger an emergency response from Buckingham Palace? And why did King Charles himself deliver a warning? Directly and unambiguously to Meghan? That's where our story truly begins. Because the moment Meghan made that call, the countdown began. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the one phone call you thought would fix everything was the one that detonated it all? Let's rewind to that moment. Sources inside the palace say it began as a seemingly innocuous scheduling request. A late spring email from Meghan's California-based team, marked confidential location permit request. The destination? London. Specifically, a privately owned heritage venue less than a mile from Kensington Palace. The purpose? A pre-production location scout for a female empowerment documentary. Innocent enough, right? But here's the problem. The production company listed on the form? One of Meghan's personal ventures. Not Archwell, not Netflix, but a new entity recently registered in Delaware under a shell LLC, linked to an upcoming visual brand storytelling series. And the bigger problem? The date requested for the shoot aligned exactly with a high-level security lockdown in central London for a major diplomatic event involving King Charles, the Prime Minister, and several visiting foreign dignitaries. Coincidence? That's what Meghan's team insisted. But palace insiders weren't buying it, especially not after what happened next. Because when Meghan's request was denied, quietly, professionally, and without drama, she picked up the phone herself. Not her assistant, not her lawyer, Meghan. And that's where things shifted from awkward to explosive. According to two sources who later briefed the press off record, Meghan's call to the security liaison officer assigned to the venue escalated rapidly. First, she allegedly reminded him of her standing understanding with Clarence House. Then, when rebuffed, she cited unnamed past conversations with senior royals who had assured her she'd always have discretionary access for creative cultural purposes. But here's the kicker. She dropped a name, a senior figure in the king's private office, and that name triggered a red flag. Because that individual, Sir Clive Alderton, had reportedly issued a blanket memo just weeks earlier. One that specifically warned of unauthorized leveraging of past royal connections for commercial productions. You see where this is going? The call was flagged, logged, escalated, and within hours, it was sitting in a red folder on King Charles's desk at Highgrove. The contents of that folder? We may never know in full, but according to whispers from courtiers, it included a transcript of the call, a list of prior venue access requests linked to Meghan, Internal emails from a deputy press secretary suggesting Meghan's team had been name-dropping palace relationships to push past legal roadblocks. And most damning, a short handwritten note by a senior legal advisor stating plainly, if true, this may constitute a breach of diplomatic neutrality expectations post-Megxit. Now pause. Let that sink in. A breach of diplomatic neutrality expectations. Translated into plain English? She was potentially behaving as though she still had royal status. And not just symbolically, but operationally. Access, influence, presence. And the British establishment doesn't take kindly to that. Because remember, when Harry and Meghan left royal life, there was a specific understanding. They would no longer represent the crown. They could no longer use their titles or status to gain access or preferential treatment. That was the deal. No more Duke and Duchess pulling rank at state events. No more palace aides smoothing their way through red tape. But now, this move suggested Meghan was still playing the royal card behind the scenes. And here's where the emotional beat kicks in. Because for King Charles, this wasn't just a protocol violation. It was personal. This was the man who walked her down the aisle. The man who tried, at least briefly, to believe she could modernize the monarchy from within. And now, he saw her allegedly using his name, his office, to push forward a commercial project that could, by proximity, appear quasi-official. He was reportedly livid. Not shouting, not screaming. Just one chilling sentence to his advisors, according to a leaked aide summary. This is the final straw. But before action was taken, there was one more twist. Because unbeknownst to Meghan, or perhaps known, depending on who you believe, this wasn't her first denied request that quarter. In fact, over the previous 6 months, Meghan's team had filed 5 separate event or filming requests to various UK locations tied to heritage, royal legacy, or women's history. None were publicly announced. All were quietly denied. Some were framed as educational initiatives. Others as private charity exploration. But each time, behind the smiling veneer, insiders say the same pattern emerged. Meghan positioning herself adjacent to the crown. Not as a royal, per se, but as a former royal who still moved within those rarefied airwaves. And that blurred line, it terrified palace lawyers. Because what happens if Meghan films in front of Kensington, invokes past trauma, and subtly reinserts herself into the royal narrative? What if she leverages past staff contacts to re-enter spaces reserved for active working royals? What if, heaven forbid, she causes a security breach during a high-alert week in London? The Home Office, reportedly, wasn't amused. A week after the phone call incident, Meghan's name appeared on a routine audit list circulated among UK diplomatic travel oversight units. Some say it was coincidence. Others say it was the beginning of something far more chilling. Because within that audit list came a note. Review status. Clarify current eligibility for discretionary access, travel exemptions, and immigration alignment. And that, dear viewer, is where the real machinery kicked in. Not the tabloids. Not the royal gossip columns. But the bureaucratic machine that, when poked, moves slowly, but with devastating precision. We're talking Border Force, Diplomatic Protection Command, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Center. Yes, seriously. And of course, the Home Office's Special Immigration Oversight Unit. That's not drama. That's infrastructure. And when infrastructure starts to move against you, you don't hear it coming. You only feel the results. And the first tremor came in the form of a quietly amended internal policy memo, dated 2 weeks after the incident. It stated, individuals no longer serving in an active capacity under Crown authorization shall not retain discretionary immigration status unless explicitly renewed by ministerial discretion. Translation: if you were in, and now you're out, you don't get to sneak back in unless someone in power says so. And guess what? No one did. And while all this was happening, while the machinery moved in chilling silence, Meghan, she was smiling at a launch event in Beverly Hills, unaware, or worse, pretending to be unaware. Wearing her usual armor of designer neutrality, she posed with producers and influencers, hinting at big things coming. One tabloid later claimed that, off camera, she allegedly said, "The UK can't erase me. They tried. I'm still here." Brave words. But behind the scenes, the countdown had already begun. Because the next time she tried to book a return trip, On the exact week of a major charity gala at a UK art museum, her travel clearance was flagged, delayed, questioned, then denied. And this time, there was no explanation, no fix, just silence. And when her team called the usual diplomatic liaisons, they were told, in dry bureaucratic terms, clearance unavailable at this time, subject to review. And that was the signal, because this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lost passport or a paperwork delay. It was deliberate. And the palace still said nothing, because they didn't have to, because the machinery had spoken for them, and Meghan had just realized it. But what came next would make the visa issue look like a parking ticket, because the king wasn't finished. He was just getting started. What happens when the man once seen as a silent figurehead finally finds his voice and uses it to strike? This wasn't a temper tantrum. There was no public outburst, no fiery press statement, no palace aides storming out with a shred of gossip for the Daily Mail. This was quiet, cold, deliberate, because when King Charles III decided to take action against Meghan Markle, he did it in the most monarchic way imaginable. With a pen, a legal advisor, and a single signature on a memo that could change royal precedent forever. Let's break it down. The timeline starts 48 hours after Meghan's Heathrow access was flagged. You remember the moment, the quiet denial, the vague subject to review, note from the Home Office, and the hushed whispers swirling through diplomatic circles. But while Meghan's team scrambled behind the scenes to determine if this was an oversight or a targeted block, King Charles was already moving, and he wasn't alone. According to high-level palace sources, 3 senior figures were summoned to a private crisis meeting at Clarence House. No press, no leaks, no courtiers, just the king, his most trusted private secretary, a constitutional legal advisor, and a retired high-ranking Home Office official. The topic? Meghan, her status, and what to do about it. Now here's where the emotional tone shifts. Because for Charles, this wasn't just about security breaches or media scandals. This was about legacy, about protecting the very institution he had inherited from his mother, about drawing a line in the sand, not just for Meghan, but for every future outsider who dared to weaponize royal connections after walking away. And let's be honest, this had been a long time coming. Remember, Charles had watched Meghan and Harry systematically dismantle decades of royal image building. The Oprah interview, the podcast barbs, the Netflix reenactments, the memoir. They didn't just walk away. They set fire to the bridge behind them. And while Queen Elizabeth had adopted a keep calm and carry on approach, holding back sanctions, choosing diplomacy, Charles was different. He believed in consequence. And now, he believed in formalizing it. So what did this memo actually contain? We may never know the full content, but insiders familiar with the drafting process say it revolved around 3 central points. Review and rescind any remaining discretionary privileges attached to Meghan Markle's prior role as a working royal. This includes access to venues, diplomatic lanes, security coordination, and preferential immigration status previously supported by Crown liaison. Formally communicate the palace's non-recognition of Meghan Markle's entitlement to use the titles Duchess of Sussex in any commercial, diplomatic, or production-related context on UK soil. Note, this does not revoke the title per se, but rather removes Crown support for its use. Inform the Home Office, Foreign Office, and parliamentary liaison units that the palace no longer considers Meghan Markle a protected individual under royal exemption guidelines. Translation? She's a private citizen now. Completely. Permanently. But here's where it gets even more brutal. Attached to the memo was a confidential annex, described by one source as a working record of past requests and potential red flag behaviors. A dossier, compiled not by tabloids or press teams, but by the palace's private legal division, with advisement from intelligence and immigration consultants. What's in that dossier? A list of all Meghan's documented visits to the UK since 2020. Records of attempted filming permits, including that infamous Mayfair Heritage Site request. Instances where Meghan's team invoked past royal status in correspondence. Anecdotal testimonies from former aides suggesting a pattern of informal credential exploitation. And, allegedly, a copy of the transcript from the now infamous call to the security liaison. All of this in one sealed red folder. labeled with the king's monogram, and once signed, it was dispatched via a royal diplomatic courier directly to 3 destinations: the Home Office, the Foreign Office, and Parliament's Joint Committee on Privileges and Standards. Let's pause here, because what you need to understand is this. The monarchy almost never sends official communication to Parliament unless it pertains to ceremonial matters or national crises. This wasn't ceremonial. This was personal, and yet, it was veiled in the language of governance. So what did the Home Office do with it? They responded in kind, with quiet efficiency. A classified review was opened into Meghan Markle's immigration status, particularly any privileges afforded to her during or after her time as a working royal. And here's where it gets legally thorny. Because Meghan, by virtue of her marriage to Prince Harry, may have initially entered the UK on a spousal visa. But once she left the country and ceased royal duties, her status would have needed to be renewed or converted into a different category. There are only a few options. Long-term residency, not granted. Citizenship, not completed. Diplomatic endorsement, revoked post-Megxit. Visitor visa, subject to standard UK immigration scrutiny. What happens when none of those apply? Exactly. Her eligibility becomes discretionary. And with the palace now withdrawing their sponsorship, that discretion evaporates. Still think this is just royal gossip? Because here's where the emotional beat kicks in hard. Just 2 days after the memo landed, Meghan's request for entry to attend a women's leadership summit in London was denied outright. Not delayed, not questioned, denied. Official reason? Unable to verify status for entry clearance. Unofficial reason? The king had pulled the last remaining string that held the door open. And this wasn't just a symbolic rebuke. This was a message. A message to Meghan. A message to Harry. A message to the world. There are consequences. You don't torch the crown and expect it to welcome you back. You don't profit from your title and still expect protection from the institution you're dismantling. And most of all, you don't challenge a monarch's patience without discovering where his limits lie. But here's the contradiction. Even as Charles moved with cold authority, sources close to him say the decision was emotionally crushing. This was a man who had walked Meghan down the aisle, who had opened the gates of Balmoral to her, who had offered, time and time again, a hand of inclusion, only to see it slapped away. And now, he wasn't just closing the door. He was bolting it shut. For good. One aide quoted him privately as saying, "She left, but now she can't come back." Not as she is. But here's the twist. Because just as the memo was delivered, just as the security protocols were updated, just as Meghan's team began realizing that this wasn't just a mistake, but a coordinated block, something else happened. A royal ally, unexpected, powerful, and fiercely independent, stepped into the chaos. And what she tried to do next might just be the most surprising development yet. Because Meghan may have been exiled, but one royal still believed she deserved a second chance. And her name would leave Buckingham Palace shaken. What happens when the one royal famous for silence, steel, and salted humor decides to step into the fire? Not for glory, not for press, but for a woman the establishment had already started deleting from telephone Rolodexes. And if the core of this chapter could be summarized in a single question, it would be this. Did Princess Anne fight to save Meghan, or fight to save the monarchy from looking vengeful? Because the difference between those motives is microscopic in phrasing and galactic in consequence. Let's walk back to the precise moment the king's signed memo left Clarence House in that sealed red briefcase, carried by a royal courier, delivered not to tabloids, but to departments of state. It looked final. It felt final. It was final, at least in the mind of King Charles. But monarchy is not an autocracy. It is a machinery of voices, precedents, permissions, rivalries, traditions, grudges, long memories, and internal interrupts. And if anyone in that system has both the liberty and the resume to interrupt a king, it's the hardest working, least complaining, no-nonsense royal in the family, Princess and the Princess Royal. Now here's the thing about Anne. While press outlets tend to paint her as the monarchy's human battle tank, complete with dry wit, equestrian calluses, and a tolerance for nonsense that starts at zero and stays there, inside the palace walls, she is also known for something quieter. Problem-solving. When others throw hands up, she rolls sleeves up. And on a rainy Thursday morning, weeks after the alleged Heathrow incident, days after the King's memo was sent, and reportedly requested access to the immigration audit file concerning Meghan Markle. Not officially, not by shouting orders, but by invoking her own letter's patent position, her Privy Council status, and the one power she has always guarded with obsessive precision. Direct constitutional access to departments of state when royal privilege intersects government remit. And that request landed at the Home Office like a lightning bolt wearing sensible riding boots. Let's paint the scene. No ballrooms. No orchestras. A modest oak-walled meeting room at Clarence House. A portrait of her father, Prince Philip, hangs slightly tilted, as if eavesdropping disapprovingly. Rain taps the windows like punctuation. Princess and sits at a long table with one folder. One teapot. Two legal advisors. No makeup team. Just the monarchy's most terrifyingly efficient minimalist set dressing. Her opening words to the advisors, according to a source who later recounted the meeting in a private deposition interview, were classic and, "She's in trouble. Let's see how much." Not, "She doesn't deserve it." Not, "Destroy her." Not, "I'll fix it." Just quiet assessment. Now, one of the advisors attempted to caution her. "Ma'am, His Majesty has already communicated his position." And response, a sigh sharp enough to open envelopes. "Yes, and I'm His Majesty's sister." Continue. And so they did. Because when Princess and clears the table for a conversation, the system leans in whether it wants to or not. Here's what they discussed, based on insider reconstructions and later media leaks from governance consultants. The King's memo was technically a withdrawal of sponsorship and privilege, not a formal immigration order, meaning the Crown had nudged the system, but the government still controlled the final legal enforcement. Any visa clearance previously Meghan may have used via royal liaison channels was now under government review. The review was triggered not just by one call, but by a log pattern of Meghan's team invoking former Crown associations to gain discretionary access to heritage venues in London, raising concerns about credential overreach in controlled access zones. The question now sitting on the desk of the Special Immigration Oversight Unit was, did Meghan Markle retain any legal status that justified special diplomatic or discretionary lanes? And if denied, the consequence would be precedent-setting, not punishment-setting. In other words, this was not just about Meghan. This was about what rights a non-British, post-royal title-bearing individual retains once Crown sponsorship leaves the equation. And this is where the emotional beat thumps like an angry kettle. Because while the King saw Meghan's actions, or her team's actions, as betrayal, and saw something else, risk, PR risk, governance risk, constitutional consequence risk. Not that Meghan might embarrass the monarchy again, but that the monarchy might embarrass itself by appearing to retaliate without process. Because imagine the global headline if this leaked differently. King banishes Duchess from Britain. The monarchy doesn't banish. It processes. It reviews. It aligns. It withdraws support. It lets the system enforce consequence. But it does not banish like it's 1286, and everyone is wearing chainmail. And that was exactly Anne's argument. She reportedly drafted a counterstatement framework, carefully worded to achieve 3 goals. Avoid making this look like a personal immigration decree from the monarch. Protect the monarchy from charges of vindictive constitutional action. Clarify that Meghan's status was under government jurisdiction, not Crown whim. Her phrasing, drafted in that tiny oak-paneled room, would later leak in pieces and included lines like, "The Crown does not adjudicate visas. It does, however, determine the privileges a former working royal may no longer invoke on UK soil. All remaining processes rest under the proper jurisdiction." Dry, precise, unforgiving, ironically merciful. But did it change the decision? Nope. Because Anne doesn't override immigration. She overrides narrative collapse. Now here comes the twist you didn't see in the history books. Just as she was preparing to send this constitutional Houdini escape route of a statement into final drafting, a call came into Clarence House. Not from Meghan. Not from Netflix. Not from Parliament. From Prince Harry. Breathless. Irritated. Possibly crying in Heathrow Airport lounge furniture upholstery. "Aunt, and you have to stop this." She didn't know. It was her staff. That's what he said, according to later retellings. And placed the phone on the table. Let it sit there like a frog that wandered in uninvited. Then, she said something that may be the most honest line in this entire saga. "No, dear boy, I can't stop it, but I can make sure it doesn't destroy the institution on the way down." But here's the gut-punch contradiction. She also said, in softer pacing, slower words, longer breath, if she truly didn't know, she should prepare to prove it. Consequences without defense are exile. Consequences with proof are history. And that may have been the moment Harry realized the difference. This wasn't a story of love. This was a story of due process and consequence, where love was not even a footnote. And when Harry asked, "Do you think they hate her?" and paused, rain stopped tapping. Teapot probably simmered sympathetically. And she said, "They don't hate her. They fear what she represents. Because she shines lights where we built shadows." But fear eventually insists on paperwork. Now that line would have melted cameras if anyone had been in the room recording. But they weren't. Which is why this chapter ends on the most royal cliffhanger and has ever issued without issuing at all. Because next week, she tried to return again. And this time, the border system didn't just decline her status. It questioned her intentions. And that question? Bigger, deeper, legally catastrophic. Because the minute intention, not paperwork, becomes part of the review, you stop being a celebrity problem. You become a governance incident. And no one, absolutely no one, saw what came next. Because the ban didn't begin at the palace door, friends, it began at the data gate. And the data gate never forgets. What if everything you've ever done, every email, every favor called in, every whispered, "Don't worry, I have connections," was suddenly printed, collated, annotated, and delivered straight to the king? That's exactly what happened to Meghan Markle. Because while the public thought the palace had quietly turned the page on the Sussex drama, behind the scenes, a meticulous, painfully detailed document was being assembled. Its title? The Royal Discretionary Privilege Review. Former Duchess of Sussex. Its purpose? To lay out, in cold, bureaucratic clarity, exactly why Meghan Markle should no longer be afforded the benefits, leniencies, or soft power access traditionally extended to former working royals. But it was more than just a list. It was a case built brick by brick, note by note, document by document, by a special internal task group operating under the King's private secretary and in liaison with the Home Office, Immigration Legal Services Division, and yes, even MI5. Let that land. MI5. Now before the conspiracy crowd starts foaming at the mouth, this wasn't some secret agent operation with tailing, bugs, or tapped phones. This was a risk audit. Standard procedure when an individual once tied to diplomatic channels is alleged to be using or misusing those associations after separation. Think about it. If Meghan had been granted limited diplomatic travel status during her time as a working royal, and if that status hadn't been formally rescinded or monitored, she could technically be moving through borders, VIP lanes, or event security layers without current authorization. That's not just awkward. It's a national security issue. And so the file began. Some pages were dry, others explosive. Let's start with the front page. Because according to leaks from a civil servant who allegedly saw the index during a closed-door immigration committee hearing, it carried a stark red stamp. No longer protected, flag for review. Underneath, a quote in italicized serif font. The privilege of discretion is only valid when the discretion is not abused. Page 1 set the tone. Now what was actually inside? According to multiple corroborating insiders and legal leaks, the dossier was divided into 5 major sections. Section 1. Travel History Post-Megxit. A complete log of Meghan's international movements from 2020 to 2025, with specific focus on entries into and exits from the UK. Includes timestamps, visa status, where applicable, points of entry, declared reasons for travel, and individuals accompanying her. One highlighted entry. A 2023 trip to the UK listed as personal charity-related engagement, but with camera equipment declared as commercial gear. Home Office notes suggest. Declared purpose appears inconsistent with observed activity. Section 2. Communications with UK venues and agencies. Copies of over a dozen email exchanges between Meghan's team and heritage site administrators, requesting access for filming segments related to British cultural legacy. multiple instances where her representatives invoked prior royal associations, including connections at Clarence House, and one memo referring to her as Her Royal Highness. That last part matters, because Meghan and Harry voluntarily agreed not to use HRH in any working or public capacity post-Megxit. This is considered a breach, not of law, but of agreement, and that gave the palace teeth. Section 3. Statements from former royal staff. Now this is where things got personal. Painfully so. Anonymous testimonies, signed under confidentiality, from 2 former palace aides and 1 former royal protection officer. One aide recounted a call from a member of Meghan's media team, requesting the name of a friendly security firm with ties to Windsor Protocol. Another revealed Meghan's team had once tried to book a meeting room at a government building in Westminster on behalf of the Duchess, months after she had ceased royal duties. The officer noted discomfort over being contacted for a private security consult, where the client refused to clarify if she was still under Crown protections. Section 4. Misuse of symbols and imagery. This section was reportedly shorter, but hit hard. Included screenshots from marketing materials, Instagram posts, and a now-deleted press pitch that described a Meghan-hosted docuseries as a royal return to purpose. Another flagged item, a stylized crest used on an event invitation that bore striking resemblance to her pre-Megxit royal cipher. It wasn't technically illegal, but it danced on a razor-thin edge. And in the eyes of the palace, that edge had been crossed. Section 5. Recommendations and potential risks. This was the business end. Legal advisors recommended that any remaining implicit privileges tied to royal status be formally nullified through direct memo to relevant government bodies. Suggested action items included reclassification of Meghan Markle as a private U.S. citizen without special access to U.K. diplomatic channels, withdrawal of all unofficial fast-track requests and border facilitation, a Home Office notice of procedural scrutiny for all future UK entries, with Meghan's name added to this special circumstances travel review list, typically reserved for public figures whose presence may trigger political or security disruption. Let's pause right there, because that last bit, that's nuclear. That's the government quietly saying, you are now a diplomatic liability. It doesn't mean she's dangerous. It doesn't mean she committed crimes. It means her very presence inside Britain now requires a formal, high-level review. Every single time. No other former royal has faced that. Not Fergie, not Wallace Simpson, not even Prince Andrew. Now here's where the contradiction bites. Because some senior figures reportedly tried to downplay the document, calling it a precautionary audit, not a witch hunt. But others felt the chill. One former MP, briefed privately, called it the most aggressive internal compilation against a former royal in modern British history. And that includes Edward VIII. But the palace still said nothing, not a word, because they didn't need to. The dossier was the message. And Meghan? She hadn't even seen it yet. That's right. She had no idea this document existed. She suspected something was being assembled, but she didn't know it was this detailed, this damning, this final. But she'd find out soon enough. Because just weeks later, while preparing for a discreet trip to Scotland for what her team described as a nature project, Meghan attempted to log her travel plans with UK authorities. The response? A cold, automated notice. Subject requires pre-clearance. Entry contingent upon further review. Travel not advised at this time. She was stunned. But what she didn't know, what would devastate her later, was that this was just the beginning. Because King Charles wasn't just auditing her past. He was preparing the ultimate royal maneuver, one that would sever her final lifeline to the monarchy, erase any residual status, and send a chilling message not just to Meghan, but to anyone who ever dared to use the crown as currency after walking away. And it all began with 3 words, scrawled by Charles himself in the margin of the dossier. Strip all support. But what came next wasn't just legal. It wasn't just bureaucratic. It was deeply, almost poetically personal. Because the next chapter in this saga would be written by Harry. And when he read what the palace had done, when he saw the words his father had signed, he finally broke. And the world would see it all, on camera. What do you do when the 2 pillars holding up your world begin to collapse, and you're forced to choose which one to let fall? That was the decision Prince Harry faced. And he faced it alone. Because when he saw the dossier, truly saw it, everything changed. This wasn't just about Meghan anymore. This wasn't just about tension with his family, or heated press headlines, or even the slow drip of revoked privileges. This was total institutional excommunication, a surgical erasure of Meghan from the royal system by the very man Harry still called Pa. But let's not jump ahead. Let's begin where the cracks started to give way beneath his feet. It was a quiet morning in Montecito. Meghan was already on a Zoom call with her U.S. legal team, trying to get clarification about her unexpected UK travel freeze. The children were being watched by a nanny. The house was unusually silent. Then came the knock at the door. A courier. Envelope. No return address. Just the seal of the United Kingdom. Inside, a cover letter, formally addressed to Harry, not to the Duke of Sussex, but to Mr. Henry Charles Albert David Windsor. The title alone sent a chill. What followed was worse. It was a summary of the Royal Discretionary Privilege Review, signed by King Charles III, initialed by 2 palace legal advisors, and countersigned by a liaison officer from the Home Office. The tone was cold. The formatting was brutal. And at the very end, beneath a footnote referencing revocation of extended clearance, were 5 words. This matter is now closed. No appeal. No invitation to discuss. Just closure. Harry reportedly dropped the packet on the floor. He didn't cry. Not yet. He sat down, hands on his knees, staring blankly at the wall, as if trying to punch through it with his silence. When Meghan came in and asked what was wrong, he couldn't speak. He simply handed her the envelope. And for a moment, an entire history unraveled in a living room thousands of miles from the throne. Let's step back for context. Prince Harry had spent his entire life caught between 2 identities. The spare, the second son, always waiting in the wings. The rebel. The man who walked away from the world's most rigid institution for love, independence, and dignity. But this wasn't rebellion anymore. This was consequence. And for the first time, he saw what that looked like on paper. And worse, he saw his father's handwriting on the margin. Because just like the press leaks said, just like the rumors whispered behind closed doors in Whitehall and Sandringham, King Charles had scrawled those 3 fateful words on the document that would haunt Harry forever. Strip all support. 3 words. 1 betrayal. Infinite heartbreak. Harry reportedly told a close friend days later. He didn't even call. He just wrote it down, like I was a file in his cabinet. Let that sink in. No phone call. No meeting. No warning. Just a piece of paper that closed a door forever. And this is where the real breakdown began. Because for the first time, even Meghan wasn't sure what to say. She tried to comfort him. She tried to be furious for him. But Harry, his pain was different. It wasn't fire. It was ice. He wasn't angry. He was disintegrating. Friends later described him as vacant, numb, and paralyzed by disbelief. One insider who had known him since his army days said, "It was like Afghanistan all over again. Not the bombs. The silence after. The shock. That slow realization that something you believed in doesn't exist anymore." In the days that followed, Harry reportedly took long walks alone. No phones. No bodyguards. Just headphones and a hoodie. Vanishing into the coastal hills of Santa Barbara, trying to make sense of who he had become. The son of a king. The husband of an outcast. The father of children who might never see the country their last name belongs to. And yet, he didn't snap. Not immediately. Because there was still one move left. One last phone call. To William. And let me tell you, this wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation moment. It was brutal. Tense. And it ended in silence. According to a senior staffer who overheard parts of the call, Harry opened with, "Did you know? About the file? About Pa's memo?" And William's answer? "You made your choice, Harry." No warmth. No preamble. Just that. You made your choice. To which Harry reportedly replied, "I chose love. You chose duty. But I didn't think duty would burn the house down." The conversation spiraled from there. Accusations. Half-finished sentences. Long pauses. Then William said something that Harry would later repeat to a mutual friend with a mix of pain and awe. "You broke the system, Harry. What did you think it would do? Thank you." Brutal. And true. Because Harry had broken the system. With Oprah. With Netflix. With Spare. With every truth he thought the world needed to hear. But systems don't thank you when you break them. They punish you. And now that punishment had come, swift, silent, signed by the crown. That evening, Harry reportedly didn't come home. His security team later confirmed he checked into a boutique hotel under a pseudonym and turned his phone off for 36 hours. No contact, no statements, no explanations, just silence. Meghan, worried sick, tried every back channel she had, but no one could find him. Because Harry wasn't lost. He was choosing to be alone for the first time in years, to think without noise, to process without being expected to defend or console. And in those 36 hours, something shifted. Not in Harry, in his resolve. Because when he returned home, he walked in, sat down, and told Meghan, "They can keep the titles, but I'm not going to let them define our truth anymore." And that's when Meghan knew. Harry wasn't going to fight the system from within anymore. He was going to fight it from the outside. And his first move? A televised interview. Not a sit-down confessional. Not a glossy American talk show. A raw, stripped down, no stylist, no makeup, no notes monologue. Just Harry, alone, looking directly into a camera, prepared to speak not as a prince, but as a man. That's what he planned next. But little did he know, the palace had one final weapon left. Because just days before the interview aired, a notice was quietly issued from the monarch's office, written not in angry tones, but with finality. Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex shall no longer be recognized in any ceremonial, diplomatic, or representational context by the United Kingdom or its entities. And the effect of that notice? Worse than exile. It was erasure, not of personhood, not of dignity, but of recognition. No titles, no honors, no access, no acknowledgement. As if she had never been royal at all. And Harry? He was still preparing his televised plea. But now, he wasn't just defending his wife. He was defending a ghost the monarchy had decided no longer existed. What happens when the silent safeguards vanish, and the world suddenly feels dangerous? That was the reality Meghan Markle woke up to. Because for all the talk of titles, for all the battles over tabloid smears and royal protocols, there had always been one unspoken benefit of her former royal status that even her critics rarely challenged: security. Not the kind you see in a red carpet photo. Not the staged guards in ceremonial uniforms. We're talking real security. Surveillance assessments. Diplomatic shields. Intelligence warnings. Advanced sweeps. Private communication encryptions. The invisible armor worn by anyone who has ever walked the corridors of power. And in the months following her estrangement from the monarchy, that armor had remained partially intact. Not because of affection, not because of entitlement, but because of risk. Because Meghan wasn't just a celebrity. She was a lightning rod, a polarizing global figure whose public profile and the passionate divisions around her made her both a target and a threat vector. The palace knew this. The UK Home Office knew this. Even the US State Department knew this. Which is why, quietly, without announcement, Meghan had continued to receive basic levels of coordinated travel risk mitigation during her rare visits to the UK. That included notifications to Metropolitan Police of her presence, temporary encrypted comms for official travel vehicles, discreet advisories from Counter-Terror Command, liaison access to emergency extraction routes in central London. But then came the dossier. Then came King Charles's memo. Then came the classification change. And on a Monday morning, just days after Harry's hotel disappearance, it all disappeared. No announcement, no briefing, just a series of cancellations. It began when Meghan's team reached out to her usual London security contractor, a firm specializing in celebrity and former diplomatic clients, to book coverage for an upcoming trip. The email bounced. Follow-up calls were met with polite redirects. "We regret to inform you that we can no longer provide services for Ms. Markle's upcoming visit." When asked why, the response was ice cold. "We have been advised that protection coordination will no longer be available through our usual channels. You may contact private coverage firms directly." Meghan was stunned. This wasn't about money. She had the funds. This was about access. Because in the world of international protection, the difference between a private security firm and government-coordinated coverage is night and day. A celebrity hires bodyguards. A former royal receives coordinated threat detection, transportation escorts, interagency protocols, and Most importantly, national protection if needed. That was now gone, and the message was unmistakable. The palace was done shielding her. Now here's where things get terrifying. According to documents later leaked by a whistleblower from the UK's Executive Protection Oversight Panel, Meghan had previously been assigned a Tier 2 protection advisory status, not equivalent to active royals, but sufficient to trigger alerts if she entered the country during periods of heightened risk. That status had shielded her from threats in the past, some of them quite serious. In 2021, a bomb threat was phoned in to a charity event she planned to attend in Oxford. In 2022, far-right Telegram groups openly discussed intercepting her vehicle route. In 2024, an unhinged man was arrested trying to reach the hotel where Meghan was staying for a private fundraiser. All of those threats were neutralized because her risk profile triggered surveillance alerts. Now, that algorithm had been switched off. One former intelligence analyst put it bluntly. She went from monitored to exposed overnight. But that wasn't all. Because Meghan's legal team soon discovered that her passport and identity were now subject to category neutrality at UK ports of entry. What does that mean? It means she no longer qualified for expedited processing, diplomatic notification, or VIP zone access at UK airports. Worse, her previous travel history, redacted in parts due to her royal associations, was now restored to full visibility for immigration officers. Translation: every past visa, extension, exemption, and discretionary pass-through was now open to scrutiny. If she flew to London, she would go through customs like anyone else. Subject to questioning. Subject to possible detention. Subject to deportation if any of her prior entries were found to be out of bounds. And just to add salt to the wound, a confidential note was reportedly circulated among senior Heathrow and Gatwick officials. All entries by MS. Meghan Markle shall be reviewed on a case-by-case basis until further notice. Discretion advised. That phrase, discretion advised, sent chills through Meghan's team, because it meant her fate at the border would be determined by whoever happened to be on duty that day. No royal override. No ambassadorial phone call. Just one officer. One scan. One call to a supervisor. And then, whatever decision they made would stand. Now let's talk about the emotional spiral. Meghan wasn't angry. Not at first. She was afraid. For the first time since leaving the royal family, she felt physically unsafe. And worse, vulnerable to public spectacle. Because imagine it. Meghan Markle, detained at Heathrow. Paparazzi catching her being escorted to a private room. Her passport flagged. Her children with her, crying. Headlines around the world by noon. She didn't need a scandal. She needed protection. And now, she had none. But here's where the contradiction rips open. Because the palace wasn't trying to hurt Meghan. They were trying to make her irrelevant. This wasn't a dagger, it was a deletion. A royal staffer put it this way in a now-leaked voice memo. The Queen let them go. The King wants them gone. And stripping Meghan's protection was the final step in making her just another celebrity. Not an insider. Not a threat. Not a diplomat. Just a person. And in the world of royalty, there's nothing more brutal than being made ordinary. So what did Meghan do next? She called in every favor she had. Hollywood fixers, crisis managers, former intelligence contacts, international lawyers. She even reached out to a private firm in Switzerland that provides customized sovereign-level protection for global figures. Their price? $285,000 per month. She didn't flinch, because safety, at that point, wasn't negotiable. But just as she prepared to write that check, her team received a tip. The Home Office was preparing to issue a formal statement. It would be short, clinical, carefully worded, but its implication would shake Meghan to her core. Because the statement wouldn't just clarify her visa. It would frame her situation as a matter of diplomatic integrity. And once the UK uses that phrase, it opens the door to international action. Specifically, removal, exclusion. In other words, banishment. And the kicker? If that statement was issued, Meghan could be denied access not just to the UK, but to any country with immigration treaties that recognize UK exclusions. That includes Canada, Australia, New Zealand, most of the EU. Suddenly, this wasn't about safety anymore. It was about mobility, freedom, legitimacy. And for a woman whose brand depends on access, it was an existential threat. So Meghan made one final call. Not to the palace, Not to Harry, but to someone her team hoped could intervene. Someone old school, respected, feared, trusted. But what she didn't know was, he had already been briefed, and his answer would not be the one she expected, because his loyalties still lay with the crown, and his next move would be public, because the next time Meghan tried to re-enter the UK, she wouldn't be stopped at the airport. She'd be flagged before she even boarded the plane. And the reason was about to explode into headlines across every tabloid in Britain. What happens when your name, once whispered with reverence, flashes red at an immigration desk? You don't get ushered in with smiles. You don't get salutes or courtesy escorts. You get pulled aside. And that's exactly what happened to Meghan Markle. Because the day she tried to re-enter the United Kingdom, not for publicity, not for a Netflix camera crew, not even for a royal event, but for a quiet humanitarian appearance at a South London women's center, everything came crashing down. No fanfare. No scandal. Just cold fluorescent lights and the quiet horror of being told, you can't come in. But let's rewind. This wasn't a last-minute trip. It had been planned for weeks. Her team had arranged it as a surprise visit. Meghan wanted to show solidarity with grassroots women's groups in the UK, following backlash about her royal departure. She wanted to reconnect, rebuild, prove she wasn't banned, that the country still welcomed her. And perhaps, just perhaps, force the palace's hand by reclaiming public goodwill. A soft power move cloaked in kindness. She booked a direct Virgin Atlantic flight from LAX to Heathrow. Business class. Quiet. No press leaks. Even the charity didn't know she was coming until 48 hours prior. But the problem wasn't the intention. It was the flag. Because unknown to Meghan, her name had been placed on the UK Border Agency's Category 3 VIP watch list. And once your name is on that list, you don't breeze through customs. You trigger protocol. Immediately. According to leaked transcripts later verified by Home Office whistleblowers, Meghan's passport triggered an automatic standby hold the moment it was scanned at the Heathrow E-gate. She didn't even get to baggage claim. The machine simply froze, then flashed a soft red. The immigration officer glanced at his screen, then looked up. "Ma'am, could you please step over here?" It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't dramatic. It was British protocol at its most surgical. Meghan didn't panic. Not yet. She assumed it was a random check. It happens. She smiled politely, followed the officer down a quiet corridor, not the public one, to a secondary screening room used for case-sensitive persons of interest. The moment she sat down, she knew something was wrong. The officer, polite but unreadable, asked to see her travel documents again. Then asked if she had any reason to believe her UK entry could be considered non-routine. Meghan paused. "What does that mean?" she asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stood, stepped into the hallway, and made a call. Here's where the emotional weight punches in. Because this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about fame. It was about shame. Meghan sat there, alone in a sterile white room, in a country she once called home, waiting to learn if she was still allowed in. And across the ocean, in Montecito, Harry's phone rang. It was one of Meghan's aides. "Sir, she's been held at Heathrow. They won't tell us why." Harry's heart stopped. He called the only person in London he thought might help. Not his father. Not William. Princess Eugenie. They'd remained close. She picked up immediately. But even Eugenie, sympathetic, stunned, deeply uncomfortable, could only whisper,